Hey folks, this is Warwolf howling at you. I don't normally do this, and like all my videos, this is completely off the cuff. I want to talk about the reaction to the cancellation of The Acolyte. So, let me just call a spade here and get one thing out of the way. I do not have Disney Plus, and I never have. I had a profile on my uncle's uh, trial account because when we switched from, because I'm on his family plan for cell phones, and when we ended up going to Verizon, they were giving that away for like 6 months. I never watched anything from the Disney Star Wars line after basically The Force Awakens. I've seen a couple of episodes, I think, of Rebels, but that was, I believe, before they had actually bought out Lucasfilm direct. I could be wrong, but I've never really watched much of the Disney Star Wars material. I was not a fan of The Force Awakens because it felt like they tried to smash together the entire original trilogy into one film, and it felt really ridiculously bad. Rey was horribly written. I'm sorry, like they had her doing things that no other Force user has ever done. They tried to justify it later on in a way that just did not make sense and breaks all known established canon that George Lucas had ever created. And ultimately, it just was not for me. And it ultimately was part of what started to draw away the audience that had kept this franchise alive for the past 47 years. So, when The Acolyte was revealed as not getting a second season, what we would call the friendly media basically started screaming about it. And much like Disney, Lucasfilm, and Marvel Studios themselves started saying it was the fans' fault. How dare you not like this? And literally, you would see on blogs like the Mary Sue or what's his name there, David Tassi over at Forbes, basically trying to go, well, the only reason this wasn't renewed, why it was canceled, let's be honest, it was basically canceled, was because of, quote, and I quote, toxic dude bros on the internet. Let me state for the record that this flies in the face of their own comments. They literally say that the so-called toxic dude bros, the so-called toxic and problematic fans, who supposedly, are the only reasons why you see people on YouTube decrying modern Star Wars, are supposed to be an extreme minority. So if that's true, how then could these people get The Acolyte canceled? Because that's what they're trying to claim. Whether this be the Mary Sue, David Tassi over at Forbes, or basically any piece of media that is trying to play softball with Disney in order to get continued access to Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel Studios, etc., etc. You can't really have it both ways. A small subset of fans should not be able to get something canceled if everybody else supposedly likes it. Now, the fact of the matter is, the modern media, or I should say the modern woke media, let's be honest, seems to think that diversity and inclusion was only invented in the last 3 years or so. They don't seem to realize that diverse characters and inclusive characters have been around since the very beginnings of most franchises, whether that be the Star Wars films and novels, Marvel Comics, Indiana Jones, what have you. And they seem to think that screaming at people for not liking things that are badly written and go against established lore is going to bring them back. And that's not going to happen. I would love to refer you guys all to, much better videos on this subject. From Clownfish TV, Midnight's Edge, Doomcock over at Overlord DVD, Critical Drinker, Geeks and Gamers, all of it. They have been able to expand on this far better than I can and far better than I ever will. But I need to speak to the media and to those people who, again, think that anybody who doesn't like this kind of stuff from Star Wars or Marvel or what have you are somehow bad people or problematic or what have you. No. This is you trying to project your own issues onto the people who don't like these things. The reason why The Acolyte was canceled wasn't because of quote-unquote toxic dude bros. It wasn't because of people on YouTube decrying it. They are perfectly free to have their own opinions and to speak on those opinions. And they do. And they should. If you don't agree with those opinions, that's perfectly fine. You're free to have your own opinion. What you shouldn't be doing, though, is trying to say, oh, the only reason you don't like this is because a woman is the primary character. Or, this character is black. Or, this character is female and black. Or, this character, is designed to be representative of X, Y, and Z group. This is a typical behavior of modern woke media. And let's be honest, at this point, modern far-left mainstream media. This is helping to drive people away, not bring them closer. If you have no reason to like something, being lectured isn't going to necessarily change your mind. Now, if you have a decent enough debate with somebody and they can give you a strong argument, you might change your mind on it. That makes sense. But saying, you don't like this thing that was put out because lead character is a woman, lead character is black, lead character is a woman and black, or a lead character is, a woman and basically only looks good because they're tearing down the men around them. No, to be fair, if you have to tear down the men in a show to make the women look good, you're kind of doing it wrong. The original Star Wars did not do that. Whether it be the sequel the sequel series, the prequel trilogy, or the original trilogy, you have to look at how the characters were handled. In the sequel trilogy, every single man around Rey was torn down to make her look good. She was given feats no other character was, and she was basically made to be the quote-unquote bestest ever for no reason other than she's a woman. But you look at characters in the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Leia, strong-willed, extraordinarily capable, but she didn't have to tear Han and Luke down for herself to look good. At least not in the original material. Now, Disney has tried to rewrite some of that history with some of the animation. For example, they did the scene in A New Hope where they go to rescue Leia and Luke manages to snag a line across part of the Death Star to basically help her and him get away from the stormtroopers. They completely rewrote that in an animated scene to make it look like Luke was completely inept and Leia was doing all the work. This is why nobody sane liked it. If you have to tear the men in the show down to make the women look good, you're doing it wrong. In the original trilogy, Leia was competent, effective, strong-willed, and a fighter in her own right. She didn't make Han look bad. She didn't make Luke look bad. All three of them looked like strong characters because they were all written as strong characters. In the prequel trilogy, the same is also true. Padme Amidala, strong-willed, very capable, very competent, and also a fighter. She was a perfect match for Anakin in many ways, which is probably why he ended up in a romance with her. All right? Because he was attracted to her because she was a good match for him. She also helped to balance him out in several ways because the dude literally had emotional issues. But he had emotional issues pretty much from the word go. That was not a bug of Attack of the Clones. That was a feature from as far back as The Phantom Menace. Anakin was an emotional individual, and Padme helped to keep him grounded. So literally, then you have Palpatine who has to try to unbalance him. So he's trying to fight her influence by basically using her as a means to lever Anakin's fall to the dark side. And it made perfect sense. Because his love for Padme, his desire to keep her alive, after seeing constant nightmares of her dying in childbirth, makes sense. That's the hook. That's how Anakin falls to the dark side. But he's not torn down, made to look weak, in order to elevate Padme. Padme was already strong. And in the Clone Wars animated series, whether that be the original animated 2D stuff that they did with Genndy Tartakovsky, or the CGI series, both Anakin and Padme were strong, competent, and overall decent fighters. Neither one was made to look good at the expense of the other. When you get to stuff like the modern Star Wars, like the sequel trilogy, the Acolyte, Obi-Wan, which from what I've been led to understand, completely breaks the established lore of Episode 4, which is the first movie that was ever released. Leia was never supposed to have met Obi-Wan. But from what I've been led to understand and what I've read, because I've had to read the synopsis on this, because I will not go near Disney Plus after what happened with Disney trying to get out of a lawsuit via utilizing a user agreement for Disney Plus when apparently somebody's wife died at a restaurant that was on Disneyland. Not Disneyland is in the park, but like Disney-owned property. So I will not go near that. But Obi-Wan Kenobi, even in the book Kenobi, which is part of what they now call Legends, the old Star Wars expanded universe, which had 30 odd years worth of history behind it, basically spent his time looking after Luke Skywalker and Owen and Beru Lars. Yet they make this Obi-Wan series all about Leia, thus completely breaking the established lore of the first Star Wars film ever to be released, which indicated they'd never met. She was going entirely off of information she had from her adoptive father. People didn't like this because it broke the established lore, and it would have been the perfect time to have an explanation for how Luke Skywalker even knows Obi-Wan. Because remember, when we see the recording of Leia in the first movie saying, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope," his mind immediately goes to, I wonder if she means old Ben Kenobi. They live on the same planet, referring to Luke and Obi-Wan. So, yeah, he would know Ben Kenobi. He would know Obi-Wan Kenobi, even if he knows him as Ben Kenobi. So it would have made perfect sense. Make that series about Obi-Wan and Luke. Because he's supposed to be protecting Luke in the first place. Even one of the final appearances for Darth Maul in the Star Wars Rebels series, from what I've been led to understand, literally comes down to him stumbling across Obi-Wan Kenobi and realizing that he's protecting somebody on Tatooine, namely Luke Skywalker. So why is Leia the focal point of the Obi-Wan series? It doesn't fit. It also breaks the established lore that Obi-Wan and Darth Vader had not encountered each other since their duel on Mustafar. This was established for, again, about 15, 20 years before Disney bought out Lucasfilm. So now they're breaking the established canon, and they're wondering why people don't like the Obi-Wan series. Well, it's because you're breaking the established lore. And their response was, oh, well, you just hate you hate diversity. You hate this one character who's black in the Obi-Wan series. Like, no. We don't like the series because it breaks the established lore. It flies in the face of what came in the original material. This is also the reason why people don't like the Acolyte, because they're changing things around that don't make any sense. They're breaking with, again, established material in the first 6 films. And they are doing this, and they're trying to say, oh, well, the only reason you don't like this is there's a black lead, or, oh, there's a female lead, or, oh, there's an Asian lead, or what have you. They're trying to use race and sex/gender as deflection against criticism. All you're doing is driving away the audience. Let me remind you that Star Wars is predominantly a male demographic audience. Or at least it had originally a male demographic audience. Now, I am perfectly in agreement with Neon. I think they tried to make this a female-centric franchise, and it backfired on them. And every time it did backfire on them, all they could do was flail and try to use sex, race, and, identity as a shield in the hopes that it would browbeat the audience into coming back. And when that didn't work, the friendly media tried to do the same thing, and it backfired on them. You see, like, all these blogs and Tumblr places, they're just kind of shutting down. I mean, even the Mary Sue, which went hard into this, trying to claim, oh, quote-unquote, toxic dude bros got the Acolyte canceled. No. The Acolyte was canceled because the Disney Star Wars material had driven away the majority of the audience, whether it be male or female. It had nothing to do with the sex, race, or orientation, or gender identity of anybody in the material being released. If a show is badly written and breaks the established canon of already established material in that franchise, people are going to turn away from it. That's why some people had, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm going to go on this brief tangent here. If you've seen The Legend of Korra, you will know that it breaks with a lot of the established lore of Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's why some people criticized it. This is the same as what happened with the material that's being put out for Disney Star Wars. This is also why people were not particularly thrilled with the basically shit canning of the original expanded universe, which had been going since like the late 70s, early 80s, with I think one of the first books being Splinter of the Mind's Eye. This was a series of books, comics, and to a lesser extent video games that helped to flesh out the world and universe of Star Wars. And the fans were very much invested in those stories. Disney threw them out, partly because I think they didn't want to use anything from those, so this way they didn't have to pay the authors any kind of royalties. I'm not exactly sure of the details on that. Came up with their own expanded universe, and to my knowledge, it has not sold nearly as well as what they now call the Legends continuity. By comparison, people are still getting the Legends material. I have seen books for the new Disney Star Wars Expanded Universe that have been sitting up in my local bookstore for months. Nobody seems to touch them. But I will see stuff for Legends come and get sold, on a regular basis. Because people still like the original Legends continuity. They don't like the new Disney Expanded Universe. Because it goes against so much of what was already established in the original 6 films and the 2 Clone Wars shows. And I would suppose to a lesser extent Rebels. Although, again, I haven't really seen a lot of Rebels. I've seen, clips here and there. That's it. When you look at stuff from Disney's Star Wars, and even to a lesser extent, the more modern stuff from Marvel, whether that be the comics or the TV shows, it's driving away the original audience, which was a male demographic, which, by the way, Disney sorely needed and still kind of does, because they've primarily been considered a company that largely caters to a female audience in the modern day, when they used to have a balanced, audience of male and female, going back as far as the late 80s to early 90s with the Disney Afternoon and anything prior to that. They were able to get, audience members from both male and female demographics. They're starting to drive away the largely male side of this of the Star Wars universe fandom and the Marvel, comics and studio stuff. And they keep chasing this so-called modern audience. But it doesn't exist. The reason why the Acolyte failed isn't because a supposedly vocal minority somehow had enough power to override all the people who supposedly loved the Acolyte. No, the Acolyte failed because there weren't people watching the Acolyte. I've seen people on social media trying to say, oh, well, this is because of misogynists, racists, and whatever. And no, it's just because the people who claim to love this thing either didn't watch it or didn't have enough numbers to justify a second season. Because you've already seen the main audience be driven off. They don't like the new material. They don't like being basically lectured to. They don't like having people basically say, oh, well, the only reason you don't like it is because you're a bad person, and how dare you not accept our deflection of your criticism by, holding up race or sex or gender or personal identity as a shield against your criticism. When you do that, you drive away the people who are keeping a franchise like that alive. The old audience, the people who love the original expanded universe, the people who look at the new stuff and basically go, this doesn't make sense because it conflicts with what came before. These are the people, I am one of those people, who have been involved in the fandom in some way, shape, or form for the better part of the existence of the fandom. I'm going to be 45. All right? I was born 3 years after the original Star Wars came out. I got into the original trilogy when I was old enough to, be plunked down and watch, a TV with my dad or my mother or, anybody. And I've been part of the fandom to a lesser extent by comparison to others, but still a fan of the original Star Wars material for most of my life. And I won't go near the new stuff because I know what I'm going to get. It's basically going to be that they're going to focus on sex or race or orientation or whatever identity politics that they want to play. And they're going to basically sit there and go, you're a bad person if you don't like this, regardless of how well or how poorly it's written. Now, if it's well written, most people would still like it. But it's not, and that's the problem. If you don't have something that's well written, if you don't have something that actually works within what was already established by previous parts of the material that is supposed to connect to, people aren't going to buy into it. And if they're not going to buy into it, they're not going to watch it. And if they're not watching it, they're not going to consume any of the merchandise, which means you're not going to get the money you want out of it. You're not going to get the return on investment that you put into it. The Acolyte, from what I've been told, I've seen different articles now saying anywhere between $180 to $280 million per episode went into the Acolyte. And people who have seen it have told me it looks cheap. So where did this money go? Because clearly it didn't go into the series itself. Did it go into marketing? Did it go into making toys? What did it go to? When people looked at this and said, we don't like it because it's badly written, goes against what was already part of the established part of the material that we'd seen in the original movies and cartoons, Disney, Lucasfilm, and the friendly media all tried to say, you're the problem, not us. We couldn't possibly have done anything wrong. And the fact of the matter is, that's the wrong response to take. The response is, okay, we hear you, we'll try to do better. Instead, they lash out at the fans, and that just works to further drive the fans away. Like I said, I was a fan from basically the age of like 5 or 6 on up. All right? I got into the original trilogy. I had no problem with the prequel trilogy. And it took me a little bit of time to actually, find out what day it was on. But after a little bit, I got into the CGI Clone Wars stuff, and I loved the 2D Clone Wars stuff that Genndy Tartakovsky did. And yes, I'm using myself as an example because I don't know who else to even talk to about this. But there are people out there who have pointed out the same thing I am. If something is badly written, if somebody is basically a Mary Sue and your only response is, well, she's not a Mary Sue, you just don't like her because she's black or she's a woman or what have you, or she's basically being treated better than the men around her, like, literally, it's like, no, like, even if those things are true, even if she is basically being, and like, we're talking like, what's her name here from the Acolyte, or even Rey Palpatine, and yes, I'm going to call her Rey Palpatine because that's who she is. I'm sorry, like, I don't care if Disney tries to call her Rey Skywalker. She's literally the granddaughter of Palpatine. So that's who she is. I don't care if she wants to pretend to be something she's not. In fact, if anything, that goes against the very message of what Star Wars should be. But that's beside the point. If you don't do something to correct the problems you've caused, the audience will leave you. But if you do things right, if you say, okay, we hear you, we will do better, the audience, and again, Neon over at Confish TV, he has said this, and I absolutely agree with him. If you do the work, if you put the work in, the audience will forgive you. All right? I am not the biggest Disney fan. Haven't been for much of my life, but I will give them credit where it's due. There's stuff that they've made that I do like. I loved the original material from the Disney Afternoon, for example. DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. Those two didn't even start at the part of the Disney Afternoon. They came before the Disney Afternoon. Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, Gargoyles, to a lesser extent, Aladdin. I liked all of these shows. And again, I'm not the biggest Disney fan. I'm a big fan of some of their classic movies. Lady and the Tramp, Robin Hood, Beauty and the Beast, which more modern, but yes, I'm talking the original animated one, not the live action stuff. I can't stand the live action stuff, aside from their version of The Jungle Book. And I prefer Warner Brothers' version of it anyway. The Lion King, the original animated Lion King, loved it. Loved the sequel, Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Treasure Planet. And I know a lot of people right now are going to be looking at me sideways for that. But yes, Treasure Planet. To a lesser extent, the animated Tarzan. And I loved Oliver and Company, which was a really interesting spin on Oliver Twist. So Disney can do right by their audience. They had done right by their audience for literally decades. But now they're trying to chase this supposed modern audience, and it's backfiring because you're driving away the people who have kept franchises like Star Wars and Marvel alive. Marvel was already inclusive and diverse and had been pretty much since its inception as Marvel Comics in the 1960s, even before that, to Timely Comics and later Atlas Comics. And then obviously, again, it went from Atlas, I think either from Atlas to Timely, then to Marvel, or from Timely to Atlas and then to Marvel, whichever way it went. Same thing with Star Wars. Star Wars was already inclusive and diverse, and the characters were all treated like they were important. Whether that be Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, Chewbacca, R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader, and of course, the Emperor. And that's just the original trilogy. Then you've got the prequels, where you've got Obi-Wan, who even in the original trilogy was treated as important, even though he only lasted one movie as a physical presence, and then was just a ghost in the last two. Anakin Skywalker, Padme Amidala, the entirety of the Jedi Council, Yoda, Mace Windu. Mace Windu became one of the most interesting characters in the trilogy, despite the fact that he had some of the least screen time. All of these characters were strong, competent, well-written, and more importantly, they were diverse without it being forced. If the audience doesn't want what you're presenting them, find out why, and then course correct. That's what Disney needs to do, and that's what they're not doing. They keep trying to lash out and say, oh, it's the fans who are the problem, not us. This is just a vocal minority. Well, if it's such a vocal minority, why are you canceling the Acolyte? Well, you're canceling the Acolyte because the audience isn't there. Tens of people watch the Acolyte, but hundreds of millions would sit down to watch the first 6 films of Star Wars. That is the difference. The first 6 films, the Darth Vader saga, from episode 1 to episode 6, even if they came out in reverse order of episode 4 through 6 and 1 through 3, doesn't matter. It's still the first 6 films would get people to watch by the thousands, if not the millions. The Acolyte does not, because it breaks what's established in the first 6 films, the original 2D animated Clone Wars, and the 3D CGI Clone Wars material. The sequel trilogy completely breaks with the material that came after the release of all of the books of the original expanded universe and tries to change things up so much that people didn't want to deal with it. The first film, people were somewhat okay with. I personally was not, because it felt like they tried to smash all 3 of the original trilogy films into one movie. But then you get The Last Jedi, and that broke the fan base pretty much, not just in half, but basically I think it was 60-40, if not 70-30, against the new Star Wars material, whether or not that be the expanded universe that Disney has come up with since declaring the original expanded universe to be Legends continuity, or not. You can't blame the audience for not liking what you put out. What you can do is find out why the audience doesn't like what you're putting out, and then give them what they want. If you give the audience what they want, they will eat it up. As a good example, look at Deadpool and Wolverine. This was a Fox film, from what I've been led to understand. Bob Iger fought tooth and nail to keep it from happening after he basically stabbed Bob Chapek in the back, because Bob Chapek dared to actually, want to be the CEO that he was supposed to be, because he was supposed to be CEO, and Bob Iger wanted a puppet, as far as I can tell. This was released under Chapek, or rather, it was greenlit under Chapek. Iger tried to stop it, but it was already going, and it raked in the money, because it gave fans what they wanted. Inside Out 2, from what I've been told, is the same thing. It gave people what they wanted. And instead of that, they're trying to basically go, okay, well, the reason why the fans didn't come to these other things is because they hate women, or they hate black people, or they hate Asian people, or they hate gay people, or what have you. No, they don't like the material you're putting out because it's badly written, or because it's basically showing a distinct lack of understanding in what makes characters good. If you have to tear women down to make men look good, you're doing it wrong. If you have to tear men down to make women look good, you're still doing it wrong. Okay? Write your characters so that they all feel like they fit and like you're not favoring one over the other. Yes, if you're dealing with something that is male dominated in terms of its audience, obviously you want to keep that audience, which means you do have to make sure that the men in that franchise feel represented and that they feel like they're being treated well in that representation. The same thing is true for female-led franchises. I'm sorry, I hate to say it, but the Disney princesses are literally a franchise, and everybody knows it, and unfortunately it's what's been carrying Disney for the last basically 30, 40 years almost, even before it was an official brand. So yes, Disney has kind of come to be known as being more of a female-favoring, company when it comes to their movies. To be fair, they kind of are, but that's why they tried to buy male demographic-led material, Marvel and Lucasfilm. But then they tried to make that female-led because they're like, okay, well, why don't we try to make more of an audience pleasing, material for women rather than for men, even though the main reason we got these things was because they were bringing in the male viewers. Well, they did that, and it started to push away the male viewers. And it also started to push away the female viewers because they felt like they were being pandered to instead of being treated like intelligent members of the audience. So it's not just the men who are leaving, it's the women too. And Disney keeps saying only men dislike this because all the women are just too afraid to speak up. Or, people like the Mary Sue will say that. And it's just pissing people off. I'm sorry. When you make it seem like the only reason you don't like something is because you're male or white or straight, and specifically if you are all three of those specific things, then it automatically means that you have no valid criticism and you're a bad person for ever saying you don't like this, even if you do have a valid criticism. They're also basically stepping over the women, black people, Asians, and Latinos who say they don't like this. They're basically saying, oh, you poor brainwashed, misguided souls, we'll speak on your behalf. This is what is happening in politics too, and it's driving people away. Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel, even to a lesser extent Warner Brothers, wake up! Your audience is telling you why they don't like this material, and you're trying to come up with excuses in order to justify continuing to make the stuff that they're not going to consume. I'm sorry, the modern audience that you want to chase doesn't exist. If there is anybody who is in that niche audience that you want, they are in the tens. Meanwhile, the rest of us number in the hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions. So again, folks, this was a bit rambly. I understand that, but this was something that had to be said. Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel, they are doing this. And to a lesser extent, somewhat, so is Warner Brothers. Although Warner seems to be getting their act together. A lot of the companies are doing this. Those are just the big ones I can think of off the top of my head. You can't keep an audience by basically deriding them for not liking stuff that you put out. If people don't like what you make, they're not going to consume it. That's why people aren't consuming The Acolyte. That's why The Acolyte was canceled. Because people weren't tuning in. They'd been burned so many times that they just said, screw it, we don't care. So for all the people who are decrying the cancellation of The Acolyte, here's the problem. there weren't enough people watching it, and I get the feeling a lot of the people who are screaming about its cancellation now probably didn't watch it when it was on. Well, I mean, it's still on Disney Plus. I mean, unless it gets completely memory hold like Willow. So you have the option. You can go out there and drum up support, I'm sure. But you're not going to do it by lecturing and screaming and, saying you're a bad person for, not liking the show. You want to get people interested in the show? Well, here's what you do. You don't tell them they're a bad person for not liking it. Come up with some decent arguments. Give them a reason to sit down and watch the show. Show them something that's really good about the show and see if they agree. If they don't, well, then you're at an impasse. You just got to agree to disagree. You're perfectly free to like what you like, and the people who don't like it don't have to like it. Screaming at them isn't going to do anything except make them dig their heels in on it. If you don't like Disney Star Wars, you don't like Disney Star Wars. And that's perfectly okay. I don't like Disney Star Wars. Nobody's going to change my mind on that. If I buy anything related to Star Wars, it's going to be part of Legends continuity, or it's going to be part of the original 6 films made by Lucas or the Clone Wars stuff. I'm talking like the original 5 seasons, maybe season 6. I know there's a season 7 that will never be released on home video to my knowledge, so I'm never going to bother with it. So, to hell with it. So again, this is going out to everybody who was decrying the cancellation of The Acolyte. This had nothing to do with toxic dude bros. This had nothing to do with problematic YouTubers. This had to do with the fact that Disney and Lucasfilm had so badly burned the audience that has kept this franchise alive for nearly half a century that they just didn't tune in. They just don't care anymore. And that is arguably worse than hatred. Hatred at least means that you're getting an emotional response. What you're getting now is apathy. People just don't care anymore. It has nothing to do with whether or not the lead character is black or a woman or gay or Asian or Latino. It has to do with whether or not the story is well written, the characters are interesting, the story itself leads to a compelling place and doesn't conflict with pre-existing material that it's supposed to connect to. The Acolyte was none of these things. It literally was boring. And the only thing was, literally, so here's the other problem. This is not a Star Wars story. This is a Leslie Headland story that has nothing to do with Star Wars. If she wanted to do her own sci-fi story, she probably could have done that, and I don't think she would have gotten nearly as much apathy. She probably wouldn't have gotten much of an audience, but she also wouldn't have gotten people basically pointing out the flaws in the show because it wouldn't have had any connection to Star Wars. Since this does have connection to Star Wars, or at least it's supposed to, obviously the people who care about the franchise and have cared about the franchise for the last 47 years to keep it going, they're going to speak up, they're going to point out the flaws, and when people say, oh, well, you're just a bad person for not liking it, and your criticisms don't matter because you're either white, straight, and male, or you just happen to be part of the people that we say we speak for that we're going to step over and ignore when they say they don't like it. They don't want to hear genuine criticism because they don't want to believe they could ever have done anything wrong. In other words, it's a sense of entitlement that leads to this kind of a backlash. This is not what you got back in the day, whether it be the 70s, 80s, or 90s, or even the early 2000s. You had to cater to the entire audience, not just an extremely small subsection, which is never going to form enough members to be a new, quote-unquote, modern audience. I do apologize for the somewhat rambling nature of this, folks. I realize I've just spent almost 50 minutes rambling on this, but this kind of had to be said. And I realize it's kind of weird that for a guy who at one point basically made a point of basically deciding to get away from YouTube because they want to fight ad blockers so bad that I'm now doing videos again. I mean, they're never going to monetize me, so I'm not worried about it. So, yeah, I mean, like, they're trying to make money off of me, and I'm not seeing a red cent out of it, so I don't care, which is part of the reason why I've been saying, write in, tell them to stop fighting ad blockers, because the main reason ad blockers are there is to keep our computers safe. If they don't like that, well, you got to wonder what's wrong with them. I mean, these guys are owned, and I'm talking about YouTube here now, they're owned by Google, whose motto used to be, don't be evil. Well, they've gotten a long way away from that. And unfortunately, so is a lot of the media that we consume these days. Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Sony, and obviously Lucasfilm under Disney, Marvel under Disney. They keep trying to go, oh, well, it's your fault. This did badly because you didn't consume exactly what we gave you and praise it to the high heavens. Well, we're not gonna consume something we don't like. Again, I'm gonna pull a page here from Neon. Like, if you go into a fast food joint expecting like a cheeseburger, and they give you a Caesar salad and expect you to pay for it and to consume it and praise it, you're going to look at them sideways and go, this isn't what I ordered. I ordered a cheeseburger. Oh, you don't want a cheeseburger. You want a Caesar salad. That'll be $50, please. No, you're going to walk out. You're going to walk out and you're not going to, you're not going to give them money. You're going to give negative word of mouth, and that's going to, expand out to your circle of friends and their circle of friends and so forth and so on, and that's going to lead to a loss of profit. And the same thing is true in the movie industry. You have to give the audience what they want. Again, look at Deadpool and Wolverine. All right? That was all about giving the audience what they wanted. Deadpool being Deadpool, Wolverine being Wolverine, and having it be an action-adventure story with no identity politics involved. And it was R-rated. I think that was the first time I've ever heard of an R-rated superhero show being put out that is in any way directly associated with Disney. Now remember, this was put out by 20th Century Fox, which is now owned by Disney. All right? And it was a massive hit. If you give the audience what they want, they will forgive you your trespasses, at least up to a point, and they'll go see something if it looks good to them. Deadpool and Wolverine looked good, and by all accounts, supposedly it is. I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet. I'm hoping to do that before it goes out of theaters, but if not, I'll see about getting it on Blu-ray. It might be one of the first things in years that I'll have bought that is, even tangentially connected to Disney that wasn't Zootopia. Yes, I bought the Blu-ray for that because I liked that movie. But it's literally like the last thing I've gotten from Disney in years. Like before that, like the last thing I got from Disney that was related to them at all is like older movies. None of their newer stuff. Just doesn't happen. Because the newer stuff doesn't give me what I want. Marvel, up until basically, Endgame, gave me what I wanted. And after that, it's like, yeah, I don't care. And I'm sorry, it's like, if something's badly written or seems to be determined to just rag on me for being a man, which in and of itself is not going to help, get my interest in it at all. I'm not going to consume it. I'm not going to watch it. I'm certainly not going to give money for it. I mean, I might, grab something from the library, but it's like, hey, I'm not spending any money on it. That's something I'm basically borrowing for free, and Disney doesn't see a red cent from it, as it should be. Meanwhile, I'll go watch the MonsterVerse. Godzilla King of the Monsters, Kong, Skull Island, Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla and Kong the New Empire. I'm not the biggest fan of Kong Skull Island, but I can still enjoy it. And I love the Godzilla films. And I've been watching Godzilla since I was 5. All right? Toho Studios, they just put out Godzilla -1. It's been a huge hit. The Super Mario Brothers basically kicked Disney's ass when that movie came out. I forget exactly what Disney had out at the time. I think I really don't remember. But the Super Mario Brothers just beat their heads in. Metaphorically speaking, of course, but you get the idea. So again, give the audience what they want, give them what they expect, and they'll come and see it, pay for it, and put money in your pockets. If you don't, you're in the situation you're in now, where you're raving and dancing and jumping for joy over the success of Deadpool and Wolverine, as well as Inside Out 2, but then you look at the other stuff that you put out, and it's all been flops. It's because you're not giving them what they want. Give the people what they want. In the words of Field of Dreams, I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, because it's not the exact quote. If you build it, they will come. I'm going to amend that. If you build what they want, they will come. I go to see a Godzilla movie to see Godzilla and occasionally Kong and other kaiju beating the living daylights out of each other. I'm not there for the humans. I don't give a damn about the humans. If I'm watching the Transformers, I want to see the Autobots and the Decepticons. I don't really give enough of a damn about the humans. That's why I'm not a big fan of the Michael Bay films. I'm grateful they brought back Peter Cullen and eventually Frank Welker as Megatron, but I don't give a damn about the humans. I understand that the Autobots and Decepticons are expensive to generate in photorealistic CGI. I get that. But I'm not there for the humans. I want to be entertained by seeing the Autobots and the Decepticons. I want to see them. I want to know about their characters, what they're doing. I want to see the plot follow them, not see the plot follow some random human. Rise of the Beasts is probably one of the few films that comes the closest to that in recent years from the live action. Bumblebee, the Bumblebee film, this had one moment that everybody absolutely praised to the high heavens for a reason. And that was because it took place on Cybertron and used the G1 designs. Michael Bay didn't like the G1 designs and wanted to follow the humans. I'm not a fan of the Michael Bay films because, again, I don't care about the humans. And while I can live with the designs, they are a little odd. But he also said, oh, well, they won't translate well to CGI. Bumblebee proved that they could. Rise of the Beast proved that they could. People loved those designs. So they came to see it. Even if not necessarily in the numbers they might have wanted. But they did come to see it. This is my talking point for Disney, for Lucasfilm, for Marvel, for Warner Brothers, Sony, Paramount, all of you. If you do it right, people will come. Look at the Sonic the Hedgehog films. People have come to see those, made them big hits. They're probably going to do it again as long as Sonic 3 is good. I've heard Transformers 1 is pretty decent. All right? And it's fully based on the Transformers. No humans! No humans! It's all about the Autobots and the Decepticons before they became Autobots and Decepticons. At least from what I've read on the friggin' subject here. I'm interested in going to see it. I'm going to New York Comic Con, so I've got to save up money. But if it's still in theaters by the time I get done with the convention, yeah, I'm going to go see it. If worse comes to worst, I'll borrow it from the library when it comes out on DVD and Blu-ray. Or rent it from Netflix or something. I don't care. If it's good, I will say it's good. If it's bad, I will say it's bad. And I don't care how many people try to browbeat me over the head for not liking it. I'm going to stick with my guns and say it's bad, therefore I'm going to say it's bad. That's what people have been saying and doing regarding Star Wars and modern Marvel for the last basically 10 years. 16 years, really, whatever the hell it is. Star Wars has been bad since Disney put out The Force Awakens and ruined the situation they had with the original Expanded Universe because they had a great thing going. They've started to do it with Marvel, where they're getting to the point where nobody really cares about Marvel. They're getting burned out on Marvel because they're basically they're being told, we don't like this, and instead of going, okay, we'll do what we can to win you back, instead they're going, oh, well, it's your fault for not liking it. You're bad people. Where do you think that's going to take people to go? It's not going to get people to come back. They're not going to say, oh, I'm not a bad person. Here, I'm going to jog back over and I'm going to give you all the money I've got in my pocket for a movie that I don't like. It's not going to happen. Marvel, Star Wars, and Disney movies at this point, and TV shows as well, they're not giving the audience what it wants. They're chasing an audience that doesn't exist. And this is something that other studios have been doing, although it looks like they're starting to course correct. I can only hope that that is the case. I'd love to see Lucasfilm and Marvel course correct and start giving the audience what it wants again. Also over in the comics, too, same thing. I'd love to see the comics start course correcting and just giving us what we want. I've been reading Marvel since I was 5. All right? I stopped reading Marvel after Civil War and One More Day, Brand New Day, except, and that's that absolutely god-awful Spider-Man storyline that Joe Quesada did, and don't even get me started on him. To the point that the only thing I was still reading was New Avengers, because that was still giving me what I wanted. Once that series ended, I stopped reading Marvel, except for the occasional time where I would pick up a graphic novel featuring an older storyline, like the Infinity War, or, you know, the Armor Wars story from Iron Man, or the Evolutionary War, that kind of thing. Old stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and early 2000s. Because that was good storytelling. It didn't, play into identity politics. Didn't try to claim I'm a bad person for being a man, for being white, or in my case, Jewish and white, as I'm of mixed race. Didn't complain at me for being straight, and it didn't complain at me for being male. It just gave me superheroes fighting supervillains and making a good story out of it. That's what I wanted. That's what the majority of the audience wants, whether they be male or female. And when they get that, they will buy it. They will consume it. They will spread word to their friends. That is why the Monsterverse has done as well as it has. It advertises one thing: monsters beating the crap out of each other. And it delivers. Yes, unfortunately, we're stuck dealing with the humans, but at the same time, it's not playing identity politics, and it's giving us ultimately what we want. The monsters, and the monsters fighting each other. You give us what we want, we will give you our money. I know I've been beating a dead horse here, and probably flogging the corpse at this stage. Okay? But it has to be said. I've been ranting for almost an hour here. I do apologize. But this needed to be said. This needed to be said, and I pray to God that not just the mainstream media, Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel, Warner Brothers, and everybody else listen to it. I'm also begging the idiots at these blogs like the Mary Sue to get your heads out of your collective asses and realize you're not helping your case, and you're not helping Disney's case, or Lucasfilm's case, or Warner Brothers' case, or Marvel's case, or Paramount's case, when you try to defend stuff by saying, you're a bad person for not liking this, you're a bad person for not liking something I like. You are free to like what you like, and people are free not to like that very same thing. When you try to say that somebody's a bad person because they don't like the show you like, that is just going to drive them away, and you're going to basically be causing more of the very problem that you're trying to prevent because you're doing it wrong. So again, to quote Field of Dreams, if you build it right, they will, well, I should say to paraphrase them, if you build it correctly, they will come. If you give them what they want, they will consume it. Give the audience what it wants, give the audience what it expects, and they will give you their money. This should not be rocket science. Stop trying to chase a so-called modern audience, because there isn't enough people in that small of a niche group to be an audience. You're chasing the golden dragon, and you're never going to catch it because it doesn't exist. All right, folks, this was me rambling for the better part of an hour. Actually, I think it's been an hour. So take care. Have a good night. And let me know what you think. If you happen to like this video, though God only knows why you would, hit like, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I will see you later.